The least I can do is make a piece of art that I feel passionate about and go out there and make other people feel better and give them a little bit of hope. And if it provides comfort for at least one other person, then I did my job, you know? Well, I'm Matty Whitcomb. It's hard to define what I do for a living. I would say project-oriented. At this point in my life, I've found so many different areas of study interesting that I can't really, put my thumb on any single one. But my schooling, my degree's in architecture, but I spent my 30s playing music in New Orleans, and now I'm doing art. Well, sculpting with Krewe du Vieux, but primarily I do oil paintings. But I've just more or less been studying art and design through, architecture and art and music my whole life. So being 46 now, I've actually lived in New Orleans with a few exceptions for about 23 years. I like to think that I grew up in upstate New York, but I've pretty much experienced all of my adult life, most of my adult life in New Orleans. So of course I saw Krewe du Vieux right off pretty much the first Mardi Gras, and it was explained to me that Krewe du Vieux was it was a walking crew, which is different from the big, riding crews. And Krewe du Vieux was kind of like the quintessential counterculture, grassroots, if you'd say like homegrown, handmade, crew, where everything is produced by hand. The floats, the art, the sculpting is produced by, the crew members themselves, volunteers, as opposed to, professional artists and sculptors who make the big floats and things. It's also kind of the rowdy counterculture, for lack of better words, kind of like the hippie crew that makes fun of pop culture, politics, all of these things. And as I'm learning, I learned that that's actually a Mardi Gras tradition. So I found that particularly interesting. I'm like, cool, this is like the rowdy and, for lack of better words, kind of raunchy, which is kind of fun, because it seems like there's no limits. So I joined, I think it was in 2018. My partner Jessica and I had just gotten together. She was in Krewe du Vieux, and I found that interesting because I was like, oh, that's the crew I think is pretty cool. She would come in on Saturdays for float build days, but I wasn't really in it, so I would stay home. And she was in Spermies at the time, and one day she asked me, she was like, well, we're working on a sculpture for our float, and we're kind of having a hard time coming up with a ways to do it. And she'd figured out that I was pretty crafty, and she was like, do you think you could come help us? And I was like, of course, And because I participated, it was, offered to me that I could, how you join is you escort, you provide kind of a security detail for the parade your first year, and then, given, if there's an open slot, you can join the crew. Of course, that means you're invited, by the other crew members and things. So I did that year, and I escorted for the parade, and of course I loved it, so I was like, I'd love to join. And, and I slowly but surely, got to, participate in the float build every year. And I mean, like most of the things in my life, I see things like that as, an opportunity. Once I realize it's an area of artistic study where I can grow, it becomes really exciting and really fascinating. Not only did I look forward to the challenge of, trying to come up with a creative way to create this thing that we want to build, because Jessica and I, it became a tradition for us. It's actually something that we do every year. We look forward to it. She and I come down to the den during Krewe du Vieux season every weekend, so it became something that we love to do together. So it's kind of one of the pillars in our relationship. Every year when the crews are discussing possibilities, obviously current events are a big role in that. And of course, as of late, what we're seeing and witnessing and experiencing in America, not only is there a lot of fodder for ridicule, there's also some very serious issues that people are taking very seriously to heart. So there's always, on every crew I've been involved with, I call them like a pun master. I've worked with some people who are excellent at puns, and they can just pop them out. So I believe it was Susan who had the idea And of course, the idea was, accumulation of, conversations. But I think she was the first one to say ice-capades. When we came up with this theme, it's funny, even a couple months ago seemed so much more innocent. But ice was in New Orleans, and of course we're upset about it. It's a very unpopular operation. I mean, we're living two lives right now where, we go out into the world and we try to put on a smile and go about our daily, tasks, but then we come home and watch the news, literally reduced to tears to see what, our fellow countrymen are standing up to in bitter freezing cold, and some of them are paying the ultimate price. Okay, so ice-capades, of course we're making fun of ice. So what I understand is the ice-capades is essentially a figure skating show. One thing we cannot deny is that, Donald Trump is the most politically divisive public figure, politician we've ever had. The thing that he's good at is putting on a political show. So the ice-capades is that ice is a political show with serious, grave consequences. So, here we have the Statue of Liberty, which is known, which is renowned around the world as our symbol of welcoming immigrants. And I think the way she's poised in New York Harbor and the way she's facing out, that design was so that she was the first thing you saw out, when people were coming in on ships. She was the first thing you saw, and when you saw the Statue of Liberty, like, you made it. Welcome to America, like you made it, welcome to your new life, And so I noticed, on social media, a lot of, you see a lot of memes and a lot of political jokes. And I noticed that whenever you saw Lady Liberty, she looked like the Statue of Liberty. She was green and she looked just like the Statue of Liberty in a lot of these political jokes, which makes sense. But it got me thinking, I was like, well, why don't you see many other depictions of Lady Liberty in other ways? Like, we see her, she's green, she has the traditional crown, and she looks like the Statue of Liberty. So that inspired me to do a painting of Lady Liberty. And so I had started that painting, and so I already had a little bit of an interest in Lady Liberty. So when we had our first L.E.W.D meeting where we were discussing, our theme ideas, when ice-capades came up, and of course I'm excited about what am I going to get to sculpt this year, what's my challenge, the idea of a Statue of Liberty came up. And of course I was, please, yes please, can I please sculpt a Statue of Liberty? And it's a bittersweet, complex patriotic emotion, the way that we're depicting her. And for most artists, the human body is one of the more challenging things to paint or render, I suppose, or sculpt. And partially because we've learned from studying our brain is that we have areas of observation that are particularly designed to immediately understand subtle nuances about people's faces, expressions. So I think it's one of the most challenging things to try to render a human being, especially naked, because while that's all statements of the political show that we're seeing through ice, the gag represents silence, squandering or a squashing of what we're seeing in our first rights amendments. So the gag represents censorship. From 1984, it's like, I'm probably going to misquote it, but the party, told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears, and it was their final command. The chains are representing she's being held down. The Statue of Liberty, Our Lady Liberty, the original idea was that she was subdued and she was sad, she was beaten down. But I started to not like that. I didn't want her to look sad. I didn't want her to look defeated. I wanted her to look powerful and sexy and capable. And the image I was going for, say you're in a comic book store and you're shopping for comic books and you see the cover of Wonder Woman or Supergirl, and they're chained in the villain's lair, and you're thinking like, oh well, how is she going to get out of this one? This is my hero. I want to buy this comic book because I want to see how Wonder Woman's going to get out of this one. Surely she's going to break out of these chains and kick ass, because that's what she does. So I wanted Lady Liberty to look like that. She's chained up, she's gagged, but when you look at her face, she's pissed. She's biting into the ball gag. She's pulling on the chains. She's not defeated. She's she's, been captured in the villain's lair. But, I want her to look like at any moment she could pop out of there and just go back to kicking ass. And I'd like to think that I achieved that rendering of her with this sculpture. So Mardi Gras traditionally was about mocking, the establishment, I suppose. I think, Krewe du Vieux is really good with satire, parody, making fun of social and political current events. The fact that we are mocking, our political leaders, and especially these days where we're seeing dangerous examples of censorship. The fact that I can come in here and make this, I consider not only a privilege, but an honor. It's funny to think that making a papier-mâché sculpture, that is essentially a joke, is a way to make a statement. And I love saying this. I got to say this because I love saying this about Krewe du Vieux and New Orleans in general, is where else in the world can you make a giant, albeit raunchy, socio-political joke, and drag it publicly down the streets for everyone to see? Like I said, every year that we get to do this is, a privilege and a blessing. So hopefully we can take it for granted and assume that we're doing this next year. So really exciting. My first ever solo show featuring all of my oil paintings. It's happening Dirty Linen Night at the Where You Art Gallery. The address is 1901 Royal Street. I'd be thrilled and honored, to have people come and see it. Very excited about that.